My name is Captain Paula Kerry, 32 years old, United States Army. The moment I entered the courthouse, my mother smirked. My father shook his head. The marble echoed with whispers, my ID folder clutched in my hand. They thought this was my humiliation. They forgot. Protocol has its own justice. What would you do if you saw this in real life? Drop your thoughts below and hit subscribe. The oak doors of the courthouse were heavier than I expected. Their hinges groaned as I pushed them open, and for a moment, it felt like walking into a hangar before inspection. Every eye turning at once. Silence heavy as stone. I had walked into enemy terrain before, but this was different. This was not Afghanistan or a windswept range. This was a federal courtroom. Marble floors polished so bright they caught the glare of the overhead lights and threw it back like a challenge. My heels struck the floor with measured precision. One beat, then another. Each step deliberate, each breath controlled. Soldiers are trained to move through hostile space without betraying the nerves beneath the uniform. Today, my uniform wasn't camouflage or service dress. It was a plain black suit. To the untrained eye, I looked like any other civilian walking toward the plaintiff's table. But my bearing gave me away. My spine straight, hands clasped lightly behind me as if I were standing in a briefing room at parade rest. That's when I saw her. My mother. The same woman who had once arranged Christmas dinners like military parades, each course timed and plated as if generals would be grading her. She was seated at the defense table in her tailored suit, her posture perfect, her chin tilted just enough to project control. As I crossed the aisle, she leaned toward my father and allowed herself a small surgical smirk. It was subtle, just enough to slice me open in public. Still carrying that same scent, she murmured under her breath, loud enough for me to hear, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Gunpowder and failure. It hit like a round to the chest, not because the words were new, but because they were deliberate. Deployed in a place designed to humiliate, calculated to draw the eyes of the room. A few attorneys raised their heads. One clerk coughed to cover a laugh. I kept moving. My father didn't look at me. He sat back in his chair, silver hair combed with precision. His shoulders squared with the authority he once used to command battalions. Now he commanded contracts, lobbyists, and politicians. And in that moment, he dismissed me with nothing more than a slow, disappointed shake of the head. No words, just that small gesture. Half amusement, half condemnation. The same look he'd given me when, as a cadet, I corrected his uniform regulation quote at the dinner table. Back then, it stung. Today, it was just confirmation. I reached the plaintiff's table. My lawyer wasn't there yet, by design. Their side had wanted me alone, exposed for the room to study like an animal in a glass case. I didn't sit. To sit would have been to accept the position of waiting, of needing support. Instead, I stood, my hands clasped loosely at my back, my weight balanced across both feet. Parade rest, civilian edition. The room buzzed with quiet conversation, papers shuffling, phones clicking to silent. My gaze swept the terrain the way it always had. Clocking exits, counting uniforms on the U.S. Marshals, noting the nameplate above the bench. Honorable Judge Miller. I already knew his biography. Retired Marine Colonel, veteran of Fallujah. His eyes flicked up from the documents in front of him, just for a moment, meeting mine across the chamber. No smile, no nod. But the recognition was there. A brief, silent acknowledgement between soldiers. I drew a slow breath and held it, letting the air settle my pulse. In training, they tell you, control your sector. Don't give them a target. So I did. My mother's smirk faded when she realized it wasn't working. My father kept his eyes fixed elsewhere, pretending I was a shadow. That was their strategy, make me invisible. But I had brought something they hadn't calculated for. A mission. A file stamped with motion number 31 on the docket board, glowing under the fluorescent lights. It was dry ink and case numbers to everyone else. To me, it was a receipt. Proof that this battle wasn't emotional. It was procedural. I let the silence hang for one long tactical pause. Then I fixed my eyes on the American flag by the judge's bench. Its edges stirred gently in the recycled air, and I remembered the oath I had taken. To support and defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Nobody had warned me that sometimes the enemies wore your family's last name. They had taught me to be quiet. What they forgot is that quiet is a form of aim. When people look at me in that courtroom, most of them don't see a soldier. They see a name. Kerry. A name that, for 3 generations, was carved into the fabric of American defense contracts and officer rosters. My grandfather, General Marcus Kerry, built his reputation in World War II and Korea. My father, Thomas Kerry, wore the stars of a general until retirement, when he traded in command briefings for a boardroom and a corporate jet. My mother learned early that influence wasn't only measured in ribbons. It could also be measured in fundraisers, handshakes, and perfectly staged photographs. I was the daughter who was supposed to fit seamlessly into that image. Instead, I chose the Army. West Point shaped me with its uncompromising standards. Dust, sweat, lectures, and nights under red-line lamps, memorizing field manuals word for word. By the time I commissioned, I carried scars, some visible, most not. But I also carried discipline. The kind that teaches you to hold silence longer than an enemy can hold his smirk. But inside my own family, discipline was rebranded as rigidity. Honor was rebranded as idealism. They had a word for me: disgrace. I heard it more than once. It wasn't shouted. It was spoken in cool tones at banquets, murmured during introductions, written in the silence when my name was left off programs. When my father retired from the Army and took the CEO seat at Kerry Defense Solutions, I thought, briefly, that things might change. That maybe the decades of service he drilled into me would matter. I was wrong. The culture shifted overnight. The mission wasn't protect the soldier in the field anymore. It was protect the contract. He called it smart business. To me, it was corrosion disguised as strategy. The shift became personal the day I caught a discrepancy buried in a QA packet for a Prometheus guidance module. On paper, the component passed inspection. But buried in the appendix was a non-conformance report that didn't align with the DD-250 acceptance form. Someone had signed off, certifying it as compliant. I did what any officer trained in accountability would do. I logged it, filed it, and raised it to the proper channel. Quietly. Procedurally. That's when the whispers started. Suddenly, colleagues in the Pentagon avoided eye contact. Rumors spread that I was unbalanced. Invitations to family events slowed, then stopped. The scholarship ceremony at West Point, a tradition tied to my grandfather's legacy, had always been mine to present. That year, the program went to my brother Ethan. No explanation given, no acknowledgement of the switch. Just a name erased and replaced. The message was clear. My silence was expected. And when I didn't offer it, my own family branded me an outsider in their new world. But there's one thing you learn in uniform. Power dynamics are never permanent. In training, the loudest cadets often fail first. In combat, the arrogant officers lean hardest on the quiet professionals. Respect built on fear collapses quickly. Respect built on discipline doesn't. That's what I carried into the courtroom. Not anger, not vengeance, but the lesson West Point carved into my bones. Quiet competence doesn't expire. My father shook his head at me that morning as if I were nothing but a stubborn child. My mother smirked as if she'd already won the battle before the first motion was called. What they failed to understand was that every smirk, every shake, every whisper had only confirmed one thing. The battlefield wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the boardroom. The battlefield was truth, and truth has its own chain of command. The pressure didn't come all at once. It came in stages, like a slow tightening of the noose. First the whispers, then the exclusion, then the sudden invitations that weren't invitations at all. Each one designed to remind me that I was alone. The sharpest of them came in the form of a lunch. The message arrived in my inbox like an ordinary calendar invite. 4 Seasons Georgetown, private dining room, noon. No letterhead, no formality. Just my mother's initials at the bottom. For most people, the Four Seasons was a hotel. For me, it was a battlefield dressed in white linen. Every major milestone in my family's story had unfolded within its walls. Birthdays, promotions, retirement celebrations. It was where they showcased their unity, their power. Calling me there wasn't nostalgia. It was a tactical move. I went. Not because I believed in reconciliation, but because soldiers don't ignore summons from the opposition. We assess. We collect intelligence. We document. They were already seated when I arrived. My father at the head of the table, posture straight as if the chair itself were a command seat. My mother to his right, pearl earrings glinting like rank insignia. My brother Ethan lounging with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never seen a battlefield but believed he owned one. "Darling, you look thin," my mother said, her voice syrup over steel. Her hand brushed mine across the table. Her nails immaculate, her grip firm. "It's time to come home." The waiter poured water into crystal glasses. I let him finish before I replied. "Home is a barracks, ma'am. This isn't it." They smiled. Not warmth. Performance. Then my father slid something across the table. A slim velvet box. I didn't need to open it to know what was inside. The weight was unmistakable. A Centurion card. Black, unlimited. The family's preferred currency of control. Beside it, a leather folder. The kind corporate attorneys use when they want to look dignified while burying the truth. I flipped the folder open just far enough to scan the headings. Non-disclosure agreement, relinquishment of claims, indemnification. Each clause carefully crafted to silence me, to strip away legal standing, to buy compliance in neat paragraphs. I memorized the section numbers out of habit, like logging coordinates on a map before burning it. Section 12.3, binding upon heirs and assigns. Section 14.2, permanent waiver of future testimony. My brother leaned back in his chair, smirking. "It's a good deal, Paula. You sign, you stop embarrassing everyone, and you get a condo at the Watergate. Think about it." I looked at him. The kind of look that, in uniform, is enough to silence a platoon without raising your voice. Then I closed the folder, untouched the velvet box, and pushed both back across the polished table. "I don't sign away my oath," I said. My tone was level, not raised, not emotional. Just the same cadence I'd used to issue an order. For a moment, the table went quiet. My mother's smile froze, brittle as glass. My father's jaw clenched. Ethan snorted, but it sounded forced. "You're making a mistake," my father said finally, his voice low. "We're offering you a way back in. Don't confuse stubbornness with strength." I held his gaze. Strength isn't for sale. I left them there, still seated in their kingdom of silverware and fine wine, still believing money was a weapon that could end wars. But this wasn't their battlefield anymore. This was mine. Outside on the sidewalk, I pulled out my phone and dialed the one number I trusted. Sergeant First Class Jake Evans, retired Ranger, the man who once owed me his life and never forgot it. He picked up on the first ring. "Captain," he said, his voice steady. "They've escalated," I replied. There was a pause. I could almost hear him nod. "Then we escalate too. Bring everything. We'll start documenting. Every clause, every word." And just like that, the attempted buyout became something else. Not an offer. Not even an insult. It became evidence. Jake's place wasn't an office. It was a converted basement in a row house just outside Arlington. No brass nameplate on the door, no reception desk, just bare concrete, humming servers, and the smell of burnt coffee. It didn't look like much, but then again, neither do most forward operating bases. The strength isn't in appearances. It's in what you can hold and what you can prove. We spread the documents across a battered table under a single hanging bulb. The velvet folder, the NDA, the thinly disguised bribe. They weren't just insults anymore. They were exhibits. I logged them, numbered them, sealed them in chain of custody envelopes. Military habits die hard. Every envelope carried a date, time and initials across the tape. If I had to stand before a judge, there would be no cracks to exploit. Jake leaned against the table, arms folded. "You know how this works, Captain. Pressure builds until someone gets sloppy. All we have to do is catch it." He was right. Sloppiness is a liability, and arrogance always breeds it. 2 nights later, we caught the first crack. It wasn't a smoking gun. It was a misaligned timestamp. A receiving log from Kerry Defense Solutions showing a shipment certified as compliant at 18:43 hours, signed by an inspector whose shift had officially ended at 17:00. On its own, maybe it could be written off as clerical error. But next to it, stapled by routine habit, was a QA non-conformance report with the exact same lot number flagged. One document said, "Approved." Another said, "Defective." I stared at the paper. Proof doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. We traced it back through the procurement trail. That's when we found the email. Not the polished, lawyer-sanitized correspondence they'd hand over in discovery, but the original header buried in the server copy. Message ID strings, authentication tags, routing codes, digital fingerprints that couldn't be scrubbed. It showed authorization from Ethan's account approving a vendor that didn't meet mil-spec, with a note. "Push it through. We'll handle QA later." Receipt by receipt, the picture was forming. But it wasn't just paper and pixels. There was a human witness. Her name was Mrs. Gable, an administrative assistant who had served in the company for 30 years before retiring quietly. Most people forgot about staff like her. She wasn't an executive, she wasn't a shareholder, but she had seen everything. And she had kept one thing. When we met her in a small retirement home outside of town, she shuffled to a side table and retrieved a cardboard box. Inside were mementos, holiday photos, program pamphlets, faded memos typed on letterhead. Buried among them was a single Polaroid. Faded but clear enough. A document signing, my grandfather's will on the desk, and in the frame, my mother standing just behind him. The same day she had sworn under oath she was out of state. I took the photo in my hands. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. But it was devastating. A single forgotten snapshot that made perjury visible. I looked at Mrs. Gable. She didn't offer sympathy, only fact. I knew it would matter one day. That's why I kept it. That night, Jake and I sat in silence, the Polaroid and the QA logs sealed in fresh custody envelopes. The email headers stored on encrypted drives. It wasn't victory. It wasn't even close. It was something better. It was confirmation. The next morning, my attorney filed notice of intent to submit supplemental exhibits. Dry language, 2 pages long. But that's how justice moves. Not in speeches, not in shouts. In paperwork, in receipts. For the first time since the smirk and the headshake, I felt the balance shift. They wanted me isolated, erased. Instead, every scrap of arrogance they left behind had become a breadcrumb trail. And I was following it. Quietly. Patiently. Because truth has no need to shout. It just waits for its turn in the chain of command. Evidence shifts battles, but it also shifts enemy tactics. They must have sensed the change because the invitations stopped being subtle. This time it was Ethan who called. His voice came through the lines, slick with forced concern, the same tone he used on investors when he needed their signatures more than their respect. "Paula, this has gone far enough. Mom and Dad want to resolve this privately. No lawyers, just family. We'll meet at the lodge this weekend. Neutral ground. One last chance to make this right." Neutral ground. That was the phrase he chose. The lodge wasn't neutral. It was theirs. I'd grown up there, watching my grandfather teach strategy over a chessboard by the fireplace. A place of memory, now converted into a staging area. I told him I'd come. Not because I trusted him, but because soldiers don't refuse reconnaissance. You walk into enemy territory only when you control the extraction. And I did. Jake drove. We parked down the road, a plain rental car blending into the pines. I carried nothing more than a slim notepad and a pen. ordinary to the eye but built with a single hidden function. Inside, a digital recorder, one-party consent. Legal in this jurisdiction. Every word would be logged, every syllable authenticated by timestamp. Inside the lodge, the stage was already set. My father sat at the head of a massive redwood table, my mother at his right hand. Ethan sprawled in a leather chair, his grin sharp as broken glass. On the table, another folder, another offer, the ink barely dry. My father's voice was cold, clipped. This is final. Sign it and you walk away wealthy, comfortable, free of this nonsense. I didn't reach for the folder. Instead, I let silence fill the room. Arrogance hates silence. It forces the speaker to keep talking. Ethan laughed. She still thinks honor pays the bills. He stood, circling me like a wolf that had mistaken discipline for weakness. You want to know what happens to people who get in the way? Finch learned the hard way. Dad had him handled. Retired permanently. That's what happens when you make yourself a problem. The words hung in the air like smoke. My father's head snapped toward him. Enough, Ethan. His tone carried warning, but it was too late. The damage was done. I set the pen down gently on the table. The small red light blinked back at me, steady as a heartbeat. Thank you, I said, my voice calm. Intelligence confirmed. The grin drained from his face as the meaning sank in. My mother's breath caught. My father swore under his breath, realizing how arrogance had just fractured their defense. I rose, collected nothing but my notepad, and walked out. No raised voice. No theatrics. Just the quiet authority of someone who knew the chain of command would do the rest. Outside, Jake was waiting in the car. His eyes searched mine as I opened the door. Did you get it? I held up the pen. Every word. He nodded once. Then he handed me a burner phone. You'll want to hear this, too. I pressed play. My father's voice came through, sharp with desperation, recorded on Jake's end an hour earlier. Evans, I know what you're doing. $5 million cash. You deliver her to me, to a location I choose, and we never speak of this again. Refuse and your license disappears. Don't test me. I let the recording run until silence filled the car. My father had tried to buy me, then bribe my ally. They weren't just undermining my credibility anymore. They were trading in desperation. I stared through the windshield at the line of pines, steady and unbroken in the mountain wind. For the first time, I felt no anger, no sting of betrayal, just confirmation. The battlefield had shifted. The smirk, the head shake, the whispered insults, they were relics now. What remained were receipts, documents, logs, and recordings. Hard proof that arrogance always leaves fingerprints. And soon those fingerprints would be laid out, one exhibit at a time, in the only arena that mattered, court. The day of the hearing arrived not with fanfare, but with the steady rhythm of preparation. Soldiers know that battle is won long before the first shot is fired. It's in the rehearsals, the checklists, the gear inspections. Court was no different. I wore my uniform, pressed with the same care I had given it in Afghanistan. Not for vanity, for clarity. Every ribbon, every bar spoke of service rendered, of duties carried out without negotiation. It was armor, not against bullets this time, but against perception. The courthouse was already alive when I arrived. Cameras flashed in the marble corridors. Reporters muttered questions I ignored. They weren't my chain of command, and I didn't owe them a word. My chain of command that day was a single judge, retired Marine Colonel Miller, whose reputation for discipline had preceded him. He would understand evidence. He would understand silence. At the plaintiff's table, my attorney, Ms. Davies, arranged our files with surgical precision. Across the aisle, my father's legal team sat rigid, their confidence frayed at the edges. Sterling, their lead counsel, tapped his pen too quickly. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace with the same hand she once used to cut steak at holiday dinners. Ethan refused to meet my eye. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Miller entered, his black robe hanging like body armor, his steps deliberate. The gavel struck once, a clean, hard crack. Proceedings began. Ms. Davies opened without theatrics. Your Honor, today is not about family disputes. It is about protocol, documentation, and truth. We will present evidence that stands independent of emotion. Exhibit 1. My grandfather's original will. Forensic specialists authenticated the signature, the ink, the date. Projected on the overhead screen, the bold handwriting was unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the gallery. My mother's composure faltered for the first time. Exhibit 2. The Polaroid. My grandfather signing the document, my mother standing behind him, smiling. A photograph so ordinary it might have been lost in a shoebox, yet in this setting, it detonated. She had sworn she was out of state that day. The perjury was plain. Exhibit 3. The recording of my father's voice. His offer to Jake. $5 million for betrayal. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. My father's tone, the same tone he once used to issue orders, was now his own undoing. Exhibit 4. Ethan's words. Played from the disguised pen recorder, his voice carried across the room with perfect clarity. Finch was retired permanently. That's what happens when you get in the way. Sterling jumped to his feet, shouting objections that Judge Miller silenced with a single raised hand. The damage was irreversible. I didn't smile. I didn't flinch. Soldiers don't celebrate mid-operation. They complete the mission. Judge Miller leaned forward, his gaze steady on my parents. This court finds sufficient evidence not only of fraud, but of conspiracy and obstruction. His voice was calm, controlled, every syllable sharpened by his history in uniform. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at them. The verdict was not mine to claim. It was theirs to carry. When the gavel struck again, the sound echoed like a rifle shot across the chamber. U.S. Marshals moved forward, efficient and impersonal. My father stiffened but complied. My mother whispered frantic denials as the cuffs closed. Ethan sagged in his chair, suddenly small without arrogance to prop him up. I remained seated at parade rest, hands folded, spine straight. Not as a daughter watching her family fall. As an officer witnessing justice carried out by the chain of command. Outside, the press surged. Reporters shouted for revenge, for betrayal, for spectacle. I gave them nothing but one line, delivered in the same steady tone I had used my entire career. This was never about revenge. It was about procedure. And procedure has spoken. Then I walked past the microphones, leaving noise behind, stepping into silence that only those who have endured battle can recognize. When the courthouse emptied and the cameras drifted back to their newsrooms, I remained. Not in the building, but in the quiet that followed. Soldiers know the silence after a firefight. It is not peace, not yet. It is simply the absence of noise, the moment when you check your weapon, count your ammunition, and confirm your sector is secure. That night, sitting alone at my small apartment desk, I laid out the evidence one final time. The will, the photograph, the recordings. Each piece had been a bullet in the legal battle, but together they were something more. They were proof that truth does not vanish simply because powerful people deny it. It waits, patient as a soldier in cover, until the right moment arrives. I thought of my grandfather, General Marcus Carey, and the words he left me. Your integrity is your armor. Never let anyone take it off. For years, I thought armor was forged from medals, from promotions, from nods of approval. I was wrong. Armor is built from choices, small, steady decisions to hold the line when every voice around you says to fold. My parents had called me a disgrace. That label might have broken another kind of person, but the Army had trained me differently. We are taught that humiliation is temporary, that failure is an instructor, not a verdict, that a soldier's worth is measured not in applause, but in whether they held their ground when it mattered most. In that courtroom, I did not win because I was louder or richer or more connected. I won because I stayed disciplined. I followed the evidence. I trusted protocol, and I refused to mistake silence for weakness. That is the lesson I want you to carry from this story. Not about revenge, not about spectacle. About respect. Respect for process. Respect for the quiet professionals who walk into rooms where they are mocked, underestimated, or dismissed, yet leave those rooms having changed the outcome without ever raising their voice. Some will ask if I forgave my family. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a prerequisite for moving forward. Accountability is. My father, my mother, my brother, they faced the chain of command they thought they were above. And in that, justice was served. Whether forgiveness comes later is irrelevant. What matters is that the record is corrected, the legacy restored, and the truth carried forward. I do not stand here victorious. I stand here steady. The mission was never about defeating them. It was about defending the principle my grandfather built, the one the uniform on my back represents. That honor is not a family heirloom. It is earned, protected, and lived every single day. So I leave you with this. Have you ever watched someone underestimated until they proved everyone wrong? If you have, you know the quiet satisfaction of discipline revealing itself in the end. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you don't miss tomorrow's story, because every day we share another lesson in protocol, respect, and hidden strength. And if you've got your own story of standing tall when others tried to cut you down, drop it in the comments. This community is built for you. Remember, quiet doesn't mean weak. Dignity doesn't expire. And in the end, authority always belongs to competence, not arrogance.